fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren, and we got the mean bunch here today.
Yes, of course.
Joe Goldberg and Gavin Stone in the same room. That's pretty scary.
Well,
You know,
we're in the House of Mystery.
Yeah, you're both in the House of Mystery, and that's dangerous for anybody.
Because if I turn around and see Gavin, I'm running.
That's what can I say? It's a face. It's a face that comes. I'm not even going to say it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the face only of the mother.
That's the one.
No, we've got returning author, and he's co-written a book, and it's called Red Star Falling, Grant Blackwood. So thanks for coming on the show, Grant.
Thank you for having me.
Listen, Grant, you wrote this with Steve Berry, of course, and we had you on last time when you did the first book. So how do you like the way the first book went then? Did it turn out the way you wanted it to?
Yeah, it really did. I mean, I think we were kind of finding our way along, and we loved The Ninth Man, but moving into the second book, Red Star Falling, we really wanted to concentrate more on kind of action adventure, moving toward more of a Clive Cussler type book with a more serious edge. And I think we really kind of hit our stride with Red Star Falling.
Let's talk about the premise of the book so listeners will know what we're talking about that. So what's the basic storyline here?
Well, it started out, Steve and I are both, big space people, and I'm a Cold War fan. And so there has long been a legend that sometime during the Cold War, the Soviets put a nuclear weapon platform in space. And Steve and I kind of started with that premise and just played the what-if game until, it became the outline for Red Storm Rising. And as usual, Luke almost immediately in the story finds himself in trouble. And it takes a while to learn what kind of trouble and what it has to do with Red Star. But that's kind of where it came from.
Your main character in this book, Luke Daniels, where does Luke Daniels come from? Like, how do you guys both create a single character like that, or does it come from him and then you do your thing to it, or does it come from you, or how does that work?
So Luke Daniels he appeared first in the Lincoln Myth, one of Steve's Cotton Malone books, and he is in that book he's a new recruit to the Magellan Billet, which is Cotton Malone's world. He's an ex-Army Ranger. He's the nephew of the, I think, former president of the United States at that time. And he comes in, he's headstrong and impulsive and young, and he's full of grit. So he joins Magellan Billet, and this series is a spin-off from that.
Hey, Grant, were you able to put your stamp on the Steve Berry character?
Yeah, when we first started, Steve was very clear that, I can do what I want with him. And when he gets the book and I give him the draft, he kind of puts his own voice on it because he knows Luke so well that I try to come close and get some things right. And I think I'm getting better at that. But he puts his distinct Luke Daniels stamp on it.
What makes it unique? I mean, what makes Luke Daniels then?
Well, Luke, one of the primary features of Luke is that he is slowly growing from that impulsive upstart that Cotton Malone encounters in Lincoln Myth, and he slowly grows and matures, and he is kind of a Cotton Malone protege, and he calls Cotton Malone Pappy, though not to his face, I think, very often, because Cotton doesn't like that. But he is very action-oriented. Being a former Army Ranger, that's his world, and so his solution to a lot of problems is to simply take action, and usually involves, a lot of daring do. But over time, he's become more patient, more introspective, and that's what we wanted to see, him kind of growing throughout the series.
I was just wondering, do you ever find yourself like kind of wanting to have Luke do something or say something, and then you have a disagreement and say no, that's not the way Luke would act or do this, and then you have to change it afterwards, and then you go home making notes thinking I'm going to use that in my own book because it was good.
As for using it in my own book, maybe. I think I never throw anything away, so everything's filed away. But in The Ninth Man, we had a lot of conversations, almost verbatim that you just mentioned. Would Luke do this? Would Luke do that? And he'd come back and say, no, not really. He'd kind of tweak it this way or that. I think the most common conversation we would have is, Luke being a ranger. Like I said, he's very action oriented, and that usually involves throwing bullets down range at bad guys. And so in the early draft of The Ninth Man, I had Luke put down a lot of bad guys. And Steve said we need to scale that back a little bit because that's not what my audience wants. Once we get that dialed in, though, we're pretty tightly focused on the way Luke does things now.
Oh, brilliant! So it's all coming together now. So it's nice and smooth.
Yeah. For the most part, yeah. I'm getting. I think we're writing book 3 now, and I'm even closer to getting Luke's voice and his thought and the way he approaches the world. But Steve does have a distinctive thought about who Luke is, and he gets to put a stamp on it.
Do you not have the same feel as maybe your other characters? Like when you write your own characters and you're not involved with someone else, really nothing to do with Steve, but just with writing a character and having someone else have kind of be the creator of that character, do you think you see or hear or feel that character the same way as you would one of your own?
No, not quite. I've been, as you guys know, I've been very fortunate. I've worked with some great people, Jim Rowland, Steve Berry, Clive Cussler, Tom Clancy. In Clive Cussler, for example, I asked him once, what do you want me to read? One of the co-authored books that gives you a feel for what you're looking for. And he said, I don't want you to. I want you to do your own thing. And so Sam and Remy Fargo from the Fargo series were kind of my creation, and Clive let me do my thing. Clancy books, of course, I was well steeped in those. So I kind of knew Jack Ryan and the way he thought about things, but it's always kind of an evolution of finding your way, and it has been for this series as well.
So, Steve Berry, terrible person to work with, is that?
Go Grant, go.
He pays me a monthly stipend to say nice things about him,
Right.
And so I don't want to breach any confidentiality. But no, the truth is, Steve is such a nice and generous guy. We've been friends for almost 20 years. During our first signing last year for Ninth Man, I told the audience that in Hollywood, Tom Hanks is considered the nicest guy in Hollywood, and country music, Reba McEntire is the nicest person in country music. But please don't start calling Steve Reba. But Steve is, in my book, the nicest guy in publishing.
With the storyline itself, then, how do you guys put together a storyline when you have two writers? Like, I find that really fascinating when you have two really good writers and lots of experience in the business, how you actually create a storyline in more detail, once you kind of get the basic idea down.
We kind of get this sketch or outline, whatever you want to call it, that outlines the major points we want to get to, and then Steve just kind of turns me loose, and I'm allowed to get us from point A to point Z any way I see fit. And we touch base a lot during the book, and so if I feel like I need to make sure that I'm on the track that he agrees with, we do that. But it's been pretty effortless. We both have very similar sensibilities about thrillers, and so it's gone really smoothly. And he just lets me do what I do, and if he doesn't like it, when he gets the draft, he says, we're going to readdress this, and we do.
So,
hey, Grant, what makes that hard? What makes that creating the plot and the character, the co-writing? It's a standard question, but it really is something people would be interested in. What makes this hard, being a co-writer?
Well, there's a lot of things. Well, being a co-writer, I don't find it hard anymore, actually. I've done it so much that I think one of the things that really helps is that Steve and I are of like minds when it comes to what a thriller is intended to do, and that is entertain readers. And so in that way, we're rowing in the same direction. But, co-authoring so many books, I've become very flexible. Not that I necessarily roll over, but I've kind of come to know when I need to roll with the punches. And if we're moving in the same direction, that is making the most entertaining book, it's really pretty easy.
How far do you think you're going to go with this series?
Well, we're working on book 3, and I'll probably deliver the draft to Steve in the next few weeks. And he'll put his stamp on it. He usually spends about a month with the book before he sends it in. It's due out next June, I would imagine. And then between now and then, we'll see if Grand Central wants to continue. Fans are really liking the story. And I think, we've got a lot more stories about Luke, and we'll just see what happens between now and next June.
Do you find your writing in this kind of category has changed over the years? Like, is it the way you write, let's say, action scenes, or the way you write violence or anything like that? Have you changed your style in that?
I've always been a pretty lean writer, and I think the violence has changed in that my style has become a little grittier. I don't sugarcoat things as much. I don't try to be gratuitous for shock value, but that certainly changed. I think in general, this genre has kind of moved away from, of course, techno thrillers, and so you have to adjust how deeply you get into technology and make sure that it's interesting, not just for you, but for the reader as well. But as I said, I've been doing this a long time, so it didn't come naturally in the very beginning because I got it wrong for many years. But now things are kind of gelling for me.
Do you think, as a rule, that kind of most people, when they're co-authoring, it dilutes an author's kind of uniqueness when they're both trying to put input into a book? Or do you think it actually strengthens the kind of abilities and kind of helps working as a team to actually produce a better product?
I think it depends entirely on the partnership. I've been very fortunate that, all of my co-authors, we all kind of feel the same way about thrillers. Steve has a very unique, I think, and focused approach to thrillers, and he knows what his audience likes. And so, I think if it's the right partnership, it makes it stronger. But again, that comes down to, are you rowing in the same direction?
Yeah, got you. You also said that, before the interview started, that Steve had some very unique kind of perspectives on the creation of this book. So if he was here, what do you think he would be saying? He
would say that you always need something really unique. Either a very unique premise, or you need a unique take on it. There is some theories that I tend to agree with. There are no really original stories. It's all about the perspective of the author and what they do with it. And Steve has a unique approach that, well, maybe not unique, but he's very focused on, how is this story different? How are we going to tell it differently? What are the twists? What does the reader expect, and how we can play with that? We're both focused on that, but Steve is very determined to do that.
You guys agree on the ending when you get there, or you have to thrash that out? Because the ending for an entertaining thriller book is really important.
So, we agree. The interesting story is that near the end of The Ninth Man, after I sent him the draft, he texted me and said, I just thought of a twist, and I'm not going to tell you what it is. And so, see what you think. And I read his draft, and it was a real gut punch, the end of The Ninth Man. But it was generally the same ending I had envisioned as far as the setting. He just put his unique twist on it. That's part of the big strokes we talk about, is how does this story wrap up successfully? But we're always looking for, can we put a spin on it, a little bit of a spin or a big spin?
Do you ever think about, when you're writing these kinds of stories, getting into areas that could be a little bit sensitive now, especially with the way conditions are with the world and the stage and everything with Russia and stuff like that? Does that even come across your mind?
It did. And if you've read the book, you'll notice we were really fuzzy about where the conflict between Ukraine and Russia was. And we did that purposely because we're writing the book a year in advance. So we had no idea what June of 2024 would look like, if it was a hot war or it was over or whatever it might look like. So we're sensitive to not commit ourselves to either getting ahead of our skis or falling behind. So we kept that a little bit fuzzy.
So when it comes to writing the action scenes, how do you generally tackle that? Because you said earlier that, that Luke put a lot of men down. When you're doing those action scenes, what are your kind of go-to methods for really kind of keeping it gripping and very, thrilling?
I think some mechanical things you can do is you need to keep your sentences short and tight. In action scenes, I think sentence fragments can come in handy. But knowing a bit about how special operators move, I'm sure I don't get it exactly right, but knowing how they move in those situations and the way they think about it and talk about it, that helps a lot too. And I think it helps that I really map out the action scenes so I know what big points I have to hit, and I know how it wraps up, and I know why this scene exists. I think too many times in books you might see an action scene that feels like it's just there to be cool. And so I always make sure that I know why this action scene is important. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things you learn over time, and I think I've just kind of put that knowledge into action scenes. I recently read a book of mine that was a long time ago, and I think my action has gotten better.
What point of view do you like to write from? Is this from Luke's point of view?
It's from Luke's point of view, but there are other, it's multiple points of view. Luke is the primary. I'm not a fan. Well, I've never done first person, so I don't know if I would like it. I usually stick to, when it's Luke, I do third person close. And of course, multiple points of view, we kind of do the same thing. I try to steer away from omniscient. That's something that's a change for me. I think some of my earlier books, I did some omniscience, and that started feeling a little bit intrusive to me, to be honest. And so most of it is close third person.
It's interesting. And so how do you create the dialogue in a situation like that? Like which kind of your method?
Again, I map that out. So I know at the end of the scene, I know what the reader needs to know, either in whole or in part. So I've kind of mapped that out, either mentally or also I've actually jotted some notes. So again, I know why that scene exists. And it also, I look at scenes as dominoes. And so you need to figure out, when this scene falls and the reader learns X, Y, or Z, how does that impact the rest of the story? And so I look at scenes as either snowballs or dominoes, and if I know why they exist and how they're going to impact later on, then that scene usually pans out pretty well. What
do you think the biggest challenge is to writing something like a thriller like this?
I think one, keeping the pages moving. I'm not sure if I agree with the earlier generations now have a shorter attention span, but I think thrillers have to be tighter today, and they have to move fast. And so you have to arrange the story in a way that you don't give them any chance to put down the book or turn the pages. And that's always been kind of the goal. I think forcing yourself to do that has become more important over time. So lean plot, things have got to move fast, and always give them a reason to stay awake at night.
How much information do you research out with things like CIA and FBI and different agencies and stuff like that? How much of yourself, and where do you do your research?
I've gotten better at knowing what I need to know. And some of my earlier books, say End of Enemies, which was my first Briggs Tanner book, for example, part of the book is set in Beirut. And so I think at any given time, I had 20 or 30 or 40 books out on Lebanon and Beirut. But over time, I've learned to know ahead of time what I think I need to know. The danger is the more you learn about a topic, the more tempted you are to stick in the book. And it's valuable to you, but maybe not the reader. And it depends on the thriller. So, a Clive Cussler book, when you talk about CIA, it's kind of light and not too in-depth. And that's very different from a Tom Clancy book, because his readers, they want the mechanics of how the CIA works or FBI. And so you got to know your audience and know your genre. As for where I do my research, a lot of it is online, but the danger is you need to check primary sources, or as close you can get to primary sources, to make sure that you're not falling victim to, if it's on the internet, it's true. And so if I find something on the internet, I'll do some more digging to make sure I'm on the right track. One tool that I find invaluable, and this has surprised me over the years, is Google Earth. You can learn a lot about a place by kind of zooming in and looking at the terrain and some pictures people have taken there. And it's a good tool to just get a feel for both the actual terrain and the metaphorical terrain. So it comes from a lot of sources. I think, I researched using some actual books written by Cold War folks that dealt with the Soviet space program. But, internet can be a double-edged sword, so I'm careful with it.
Steve and you guys are known for the historical elements of your books. I'm assuming you're using flashbacks. I'm assuming you're using flashbacks. Maybe not. But if you are, how you deal with the period part of the book. That might be 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, Steve is extremely good. He has a nice, subtle touch with history, and you see that in all the Cotton Malone books. And so a lot of those scenes, Steve actually pens. I'll do a draft, but he kind of really revises them well. The prologue, for example, in Red Star Falling, that was Steve's from scratch contribution because we're dealing with Ivan the Terrible, and you need to kind of set the tone about Ivan and his lost library. And Steve does that very well. I do history pretty well, but I know that Steve is going to put his stamp on it, and that's the way I like it.
If you don't want to mess up the culture, or you talk about dialogue, really, how they talked back then, or what they would have done in their time period.
Right.
And there's going to be the history people out there going to go, no, they did not use horses, they used mules, and you're going to kind of give you a break.
That is the danger, and Steve gets, I don't get as many, but Steve gets a fair number of emails about folks that know more than this. But that's just the danger of being a fiction author. That's unavoidable.
Hey, so do you have a subtext, a meaning? Is there something you want the reader to get out of this story, or is it purely entertainment?
For me, it's purely entertainment. I don't, early on, whether it's just because I'm not that deep of a guy or not, I don't know. But early on, despite what I learned from many how-to books, I don't concentrate too much on theme until and if it emerges in the book. That's a good way to go about it, because if you get too immersed in what's my theme, especially in a thriller, which is meant to entertain, you can lose momentum. I think the theme that emerged from this book was how haunted Luke was about John Vince, his partner that he lost 2 years earlier on an intelligence operation. And, Luke is a ranger, as I said, and they're a lot of soldiers are, but they're the leave no person behind kind of folks. And whether he's right or wrong, he did leave somebody behind on the battlefield. And so for Luke, it's about making that right. And then once he finds out why John Vince disappears, it's about preventing something pretty awful happening to the world.
Do you have someone pictured when you write a character like Luke? Is there somebody like an actor or maybe someone you know, or do you create a picture in your mind of who that character would look like and how they would stand and walk, or do you not do that?
Somewhat. I mean, I think it's odd because some of the secondary characters I see better. But for me, Luke, or most characters I do, they're not about appearance. It's about the way they look at the world and how they move through the world. And they might have different mannerisms or whatever, but I think what really engages readers is not appearance, but it's the personality. It's how their unique view on the world and their background. So I concentrate more on that. And so for me, a character is kind of a bundle of mannerisms and baggage and training.
That sounds like Gavin.
Yeah.
I was about to ask that question. You're talking about that?
Yeah, there's a lot of baggage there, I'll tell you.
Oh, you're not kidding.
No, that's good. And listen, and when you do Tom Clancy novels, I'm sure you get asked this a lot, but just curious, how does that influence the way you write the novel when it's someone else's original work?
Early on when I wrote the first Dead or Alive, and it was a big Jack Ryan book, Jack Ryan Jr. as well. And so that was a very different book than it was a massive, massive plot. But then when I took over kind of the Jack Ryan Jr. series after that, the editor and I kind of talked that these are going to be faster paced, less global, and more focused on Jack Ryan Jr. In between his campus work, the things that you don't see when you read a big campus novel. And so those plots were pretty lean and fast and very personal. You can find that, I think, anytime Jack Ryan Jr. was going in the field, it wasn't just to save the world, so to speak, but also to make things right in something personal in his life.
So where do you think thriller writing is going, the thriller genre, so to speak? Where do you think it's going to go in the next 5-10 years?
I wish I knew. I do worry that we're becoming, and this is more of a philosophical thing, but I do worry that we're becoming so addicted to, kind of hunting and pecking information that sticking to a novel that's 100,000 words is going to become less and less popular. But that just might be a fear of mine in that I'm a reader and a writer. But I really don't know where it's going to go. I don't think that it will ever go away, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
I'm getting up there because you're putting out a series of books like every year, basically, that people want to binge books now. So you put all three of your Luke Daniel books out at the same time, or put a month between them.
Right.
So people just gobble, gobble, gobble. I get back to your attention span thing. That seems to be a little bit of what I'm seeing. May not be the way it goes, but you're starting to see that more.
And that sort of mirrors, watching Netflix or Hulu, where
Exactly.
people will watch an entire series in 10 days. So you might be onto something there.
Yeah, they don't want to wait. There's no patience. It's not like the old times where you wait for the next part, so impatient.
They don't want to go back and read the first book. It's like, give me the first book and the second and the third right now.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, you get on it.
Yeah, I'll get it. That's my problem.
Well, okay, so let's talk about social media contact. What do people do to find Grant?
Well, they can find both myself and Steve. Steve's website is steveberry.org, and he's, of course, on Facebook, and I'm grantblackwood.com. I'm on Facebook and everywhere else. Go to one of our websites, and you'll get full details about not just Red Star Falling, but the first Luke Daniels book, which deals with the JFK assassination. You'll find both books on our websites.
Well, fantastic. Of course, we'll have all of that up, along with the new book, Red Star Falling. So, Grant Blackwood, thank you for being here.
Thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Grant.
Thanks, Grant.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.